Hello and welcome to the latest Royal Roundup from TalkTV. So pop the kettle on. This is the Royal Tea. I'm Sarah Hewson. It is finally here. Harry and Meghan's Netflix documentary has been unleashed. The TV bomb has been detonated. Joining me in the studio to discuss it are royal commentator Afua Hagan, TalkTV host Kevin O'Sullivan, and royal commentator and author of Elizabeth and Philip, Dr. Tessa Dunlop. We have all been binge watching this documentary this morning, the 3 episodes that are out so far. There is so much to discuss. Yeah. So let us start right at the beginning. There is a caption on screen by Netflix which says members of the royal family declined to comment on the content within this series. Now, just before we came on air, this has been disputed. It is understood that neither Buckingham Palace, Kensington Palace, nor senior members of the royal family believe they have been approached. Kevin, I'll come to you on this one. After the controversies over the trailers and the use of potentially misleading footage in that, how damaging is this particular part, this denial now from Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace?
Well, if what the palaces are saying is true, and the contents of this series were not put to them, and yet the series claims that the contents were put to the palace, this is very profound, very fundamental. Now, in terms of the trailers, you know, Harry and Meghan, I'm sure, would argue, probably with some justification, this is just Netflix stirring things up. They weren't a party to picking the bits of footage that were used in those rather explosive trailers. So fair enough.
And their allies have kind of said that everyone understands you use stock footage.
Yeah, and also it's about creating an atmosphere.
Yeah, but we do know that those pictures, those footage that were used were not correct. They were fake. They were not about what they were supposed to be about. But that's one thing, because Harry and Meghan can say, well, we weren't a party to that process. Now, if this is true, and neither Netflix, Harry or Meghan put the contents of this series to the palace and yet claim that they did.
They don't use the word palace, Kevin.
This is a serious issue. This is a complete and dangerous and profound lie.
But this is the thing, though, is that, first of all, I don't think, again, like with the editing of the trailers, it's not up to Harry and Meghan to put the contents of it.
They can't keep disabusing themselves of everything.
Let me finish. It's not up to Harry and Meghan to put it to the royal family, to either of the palaces. It's up to the production company and it's up to Netflix. Now, the palaces have said that they haven't been approached. Who's to say that we automatically believe the palace? And who's to say that we automatically...
So you're saying the palace is a lie?
Let me finish. Who's to say that we automatically believe the palace, but who is to say that we automatically believe Netflix? There's versions of the truth here.
Once again, recollections may vary. But just quickly, they do say members of the royal family. They don't say that they approached the palace for comment.
That's very true.
There's a lot of members of the royal family. Maybe Eugenie was approached. Who knows? Or Beatrice, perhaps.
Well, who knows? I want to get your overview, having watched it. Afua, there was so much speculation running up to this about what might be to come. Yeah. I mean, we've got to caveat this. We're only halfway through.
Yes.
But is this the kind of big TV bomb, the big danger moment for the royal family that many had expected?
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not, no. I think if you compare this to the interview with Oprah, we're not really learning anything new. We're learning details. We've got more fleshing out, perhaps, of things we already knew, aspects of the love story that we already knew. I mean, we found out that they met on Instagram. I didn't know that before. You know, we've heard Archie's voice for the first time. We've got lots of home footage and home pictures of them. They've talked about the relationship with the press. He talks about Meghan's relationship with her father. We aren't actually learning anything much that we didn't know before. You know, we get to see the inside of the house, which is quite exciting as well. You know, a bit of house envy there. But it's definitely not as bombshelly as perhaps we expected, or as much of a bombshell as the Oprah interview was. But like you so rightly said, to caveat it, this is only episodes 1 to 3. 4, 5 and 6 might take us down a completely different route.
We haven't got to the nuts and bolts of Brexit yet, have we? I mean, Tessa, what's your impression?
I slightly disagree with you. I think that the sort of soft focus lens, the idea that true love only blossoms beyond the walls of the formal palace, the little insidious moments where they suggest, the likes of Kate and Wills are both formal on the outside and formal on the inside. That in fact, only when you've got Californian seeped landscapes can you really be free and happy. I thought that was weirdly powerful, Christmassy, kind of, and actually quite anti-British. I felt, and I'm someone who sits neutrally in the landscape here, but I felt a little bit like, oh, my island's under siege. Slightly like, Britain was the old-fashioned one, Britain was the most racist one, and the institution of monarchy as part of that problem.
I used to live in LA and cover the film scene there, and nobody in the business goes around going, great movie, great movie. They go around going, great trail, great trail. It's all they care about, the trailer to sell the film. Yeah. That's what they focus on. So what we've got here, it seems to me, is a great trail. In other words, they took tiny moments from 6 episodes, squeezed them into these bombshell 2 trailers, and got us all excited. We thought we were going to get this kind of fuselage of attacks on the royal family, racism, the nightmare of women who marry into this institution. In fact, what we've got so far is a really tedious plodding through their boring love story. I don't care about any of that.
But they're not appealing to you,
It was
Kevin.
so well, they're certainly not.
No.
It was dull as ditch water.
I actually think it was powerful. I thought it was quite powerful.
Why? Who cares about their love story?
I'm nosy. I really enjoyed looking behind the scenes. I mean, there we see the Larchie with his American accent running around the garden, and Meghan holding him up at a picture of Diana and saying, "Hey, Grandma." And we do see behind the scenes. I mean, there's a slight difficulty there, isn't there, that this notoriously private couple who talked about their privacy being invaded have now willingly invited the cameras into their home and filming their children.
But for them, it's about controlling the narrative, isn't it? Because this is the thing, that the kind of mistruth that has been peddled is that they said they wanted privacy, but actually what they wanted was to be able to choose what people saw and control the narrative. They wanted control. And
that's not a good thing, though, is it?
Isn't that the point of public life?
It's not a good thing.
But it's not about being a good or bad thing. I'm just stating what they said. And so that's what they have here. They have control. They are controlling what we can see, what footage has been used, what pictures have been used, what video. Yes, they've put a lot of themselves out there. There's no denying that. But they have chosen what they want us to see.
But it's interesting because I wonder if they've almost gone too far in terms of the control. On the one hand, it's powerful. I reiterate, it felt anti-British, but it's also hugely one-sided. And if they'd been slightly braver and maybe had a couple more questioning or controversial voices, or someone challenging them slightly on their position, it could have felt braver. I thought one of the key points, key arguments, was their issue with the relationship between the palace and the press.
Yes, this contract, this invisible contract.
Indeed, which exists and has existed throughout the 20th century. Yeah. Conservative press are absolutely dependent on the popularity of monarchy and vice versa. Yeah. And actually, I thought they called that out in quite a powerful way. And as somebody who isn't part of that press pack, but who works with that press pack, it exists. That's the truism.
Tim Burt, who's an advisor to Archewell, says in it that we pay, you pose. And there is one scene that I thought was quite powerful where they show some archive footage of the young Princes William and Harry with their cousins Beatrice and Eugenie on a skiing holiday. Yeah. And the children are then made to pose, and you can see that they're uncomfortable with it. And you've got Sarah Ferguson in the background saying, "Are you okay, girls?" And Harry talks about his memories of his childhood being swamped with paparazzi. And that is a thread running through this. The relationship, media intrusion, press intrusion, and that contract between the press and the palace.
Well, he's bought into a lie about his mother's death, because there is this pretense that the paparazzi hounded Princess Diana to her death. No, that's not true. She died because she got into a car being driven by a drunk Frenchman.
Yeah, but there's no denying that she was.
But it wasn't paparazzi that did it. It was him.
But she was
so he's blaming the press when it wasn't the press's fault.
But I mean, even if that may or may not be true, there's still a lot to be said about the press and the press intrusion, but also the way that the press wrote about Meghan, especially in those early days with the straight out Compton headlines and all that kind of stuff. The inference, the conversations about her being biracial, but she doesn't look dark enough, and all of that, and then naivety, thinking that wouldn't matter. That's an underestimation, actually, of not only Britain but the British press.
And Tessa, I want your take on this, because Harry describes this kind of rite of passage that women marrying into the royal family get treated in a certain way by the media, and that men in the royal family seem to say, well, our wives and girlfriends went through it, therefore why should it be any different for yours?
Well, it's like it's standard fare, isn't it? I was bullied, so you put up with it too. It's kind of pulling up the trapdoor behind you. I don't entirely believe that it's just a problem for women. I mean, I've written extensively about Prince Philip's youth. We were hugely reticent about a foreign but white royal prince buying into our royal family. We thought he was a fortune hunter, and there are similarities there. Somebody aesthetically, arguably more attractive than the person they were marrying. Harry himself says, "Wow, a ginger's pulled a beautiful woman." He owns it.
He says his own family were impressed; they couldn't believe it.
Indeed. So there's a whiff then of, well, why is she marrying him? Is she a fortune hunter? And the exact same whiff hung around Philip for a very long time. And also, we didn't like his Hellenic connection to the Greek throne, and we didn't like his German blood. That obviously wasn't racial, but there was xenophobia there was the fear of the foreigner, and there was the fear of somebody running off with our primary national asset, our crown jewel.
Another moment that stands out is where Harry says, for so many people in the family, especially the men, there can be a temptation or an urge to marry someone who would fit the mould, as opposed to somebody you are perhaps destined to be with. The difference between making a decision with your head or your heart. That is kind of reading between the lines. That is being seen potentially as a swipe towards William. I mean, you can't say that Charles married someone who fitted the mould ultimately with Camilla, can you?
But this is the
but
thing,
he did with Diana.
Yeah, nor did William. William married outside royal circles. He married a commoner. So same deal.
I would really like to think that that conversation, that line of questioning, is not about Kate. And I'll probably be in the minority where loads of people will be like, it's clearly about Kate. They're making a dig. But I hate the sort of pitting women against each other, pitting Kate against Meghan. I don't think it's necessary, and I would like to think he's not saying that. He's talking about the family generally, because what we don't need to do is draw Kate and William into this when they haven't been mentioned explicitly,
we don't know yet. They might be, mightn't they?
But they haven't been mentioned explicitly up until this episode.
They are pictured.
But we don't need to do that.
Well,
yes, they've been pictured.
Absolutely do.
They've been pictured.
Of course we need to draw them into. We can't have a sensible discussion
he hasn't
otherwise.
said, this is about Kate, this is about William.
What about what Meghan says about that first meeting with Kate?
Yeah.
And that she went to hug her, and that she realised it's jarring for Brits, and that formality out in public was the same behind the scenes. But she's kind of portraying
I think
Kate
in that
old
instance
light.
she is, but I think there's also quite a few cultural differences which play out throughout. When they're talking about the curtsy and the googling the national anthem and all that kind of stuff. There's clearly the culture clash between them played a huge part in that, I think.
Also, I think it's worth bearing in mind that what's interesting is this idea of Britishness is cast through the prism of one of the most ancient institutions.
Absolutely,
monarchy.
yeah.
So it's interesting, this is a global brand. We are going to be viewed by millions of people all over the world. I've just been on the other side of Europe and this was headline news. So this isn't solely about us in America. And it's fascinating that we are being defined through this very white, rigid, hereditary institution, when actually I know a lot of American people I'm much more likely to hug than them. But the other thing, there was a positioning of Kate. Not only was she referred to as formal, but in those images alongside that narrative was Kate in white, looking quite buttoned up with a little hat and sort of tight face. So I thought there were unfortunate subliminal messages that were pumped out without anything being clearly articulated. And that's about direction, isn't it?
And editing.
It's not really that, it wasn't that subliminal, was it? I mean, using that particular image of Kate, who is of course a very beautiful woman, in that picture she looked like Cruella de Vil. They just caught her going like that, really nasty picture, and that was obviously used deliberately. But once again, you can't necessarily blame, and I hate to say this, but you can't necessarily blame Harry and Meghan for that. That'll be Netflix.
Meghan had already, in an interview she did with a magazine, distanced herself, hadn't she? She'd said that actually we've got a director working on this. It might not be the story we choose to tell. It's through her lens.
What we've got here is Netflix with a couple that they've given £100 million contract to, and Netflix are getting their money's worth, and they are in control of this production.
Yeah,
Let's
absolutely.
talk about that, because in many ways I think actually the players will in time fade into the background. This is about different ways of messaging globally, and we have our established British media up against uncontrollable, outside of Ofcom, the likes of Netflix, this giant behemoth streamer. That is hugely threatening in terms of our traditional way of telling our own story.
But does this do anything that other programmes, documentaries, interviews have
Really?
It's the global reach,
done
and it's the
before?
hype.
Anything different?
No, I don't think so. It's like I said, it's not telling us necessarily anything new. And yes, it does have a global reach, but so does the BBC, and you can find things if you want to. It's absolutely about how Netflix have chosen to tell the story. Of course, Harry and Meghan, a central part to that, have sat down and have talked a lot in their own words. But there's a lot more elements to it than just the two of them.
Do you feel as a woman of colour that it makes a black woman? Do you feel it misrepresents Britain, or do you feel the way in which the race narrative was cast, and it was casting right back to the narrative of British imperial slavery and how that plays out in the modern royal family? Did you feel that was fair? You related to that?
I did, definitely. I mean, Ghana got a mention. I was very, very pleased about that. That's where my heritage is from. And, the effects of imperialism and the Commonwealth, I think, were very, very well explained, and how it still has an effect on countries that are part of the Commonwealth today, and how that filters down into members, of that Commonwealth community who are in the UK today. When we talk about Brexit in the context when Harry and Meghan got engaged, and how, the right-wing anti-immigration and the othering sentiment grew. Oh, absolutely.
I'm very uncomfortable by
accurate.
this sort of the race narrative.
That's sad for you.
Well, no, that she's thrown these bombshells at the palace. Oh, somebody speculated on what colour my baby might be, and by the way, that technically may not be racist anyway. But she's never named anyone. She's never talked of any other incidents, and by her vague slur, the entire royal family is slurred, and I think she needs to specify.
But that's the fear, isn't it? That's been the fear at the palace, that this will be specific.
Well,
we
yeah,
haven't
that's the
seen
problem,
it yet.
and she knows what she's doing. She's slurred the entire royal family.
But isn't this is about...
And by the way, the royal family are not racist. They're not
quite
racist,
positive.
and the royal family is not structurally racist. So, what she's saying is absolute nonsense.
But Kevin, that's your truth.
Tell me why the royal family is structurally racist.
I think that
I think that's a debate
the last
for
week,
another day.
That's an unresolved
Well, I say it's
question.
absolutely not true.
Okay, but
This
this is about...
the thing is that, sorry, 1 second. Just because you have not experienced racism does not mean that it doesn't exist. And that is very, very problematic for you to deny another person's experience because you do not and never will understand it.
Why doesn't she tell us about it then? Why doesn't she name?
That's exactly what she has done.
The royal?
She has told
She has
people
not
about
named
it.
the royal. She has just cast a vague slur, which is cowardly
but isn't
and
that-
really derogatory to the
It's
entire
very, very
royal family.
difficult as for someone who's experienced racism to talk about it because of attitudes like
Name
yours.
the
It is so
perpetrator.
difficult for a person to sit there and say, this happened to me because of people like yourself.
Can I talk about Brexit? Because their advisors talk about the timing of their relationship, this fairy tale of this American mixed race princess coming into the British monarchy, and that the optimism. Because that's where we start. We start from this position of optimism, don't we? This fairy tale, and that this is going to be a woman who can modernise the monarchy. But that the timing coming as it did with Brexit, which amplified racial divides, that made it very difficult for them. And that is something that they say very clearly in this piece, that Brexit was a factor in how Meghan was treated.
They went where most of the British press tends to avoid, doesn't it? They went to the B word, Brexit, and I thought that they their argument is that the coarsening of public debate, they were, well, I suppose, the victim of that.
That Brexit enabled?
It facilitated a coarser way of describing and talking about what should have been an innocent courtship. I wonder if, on the other hand, there wasn't also a delight that our pretty foosty, old-fashioned, bright white, blue-blooded royal family suddenly had this woman of colour, mixed race woman from America, and therefore it was over-amplified. It seemed to be, and that may again be the Netflix editing, but this constant narrative of her being mixed race, when she sort of said herself she'd never really even considered herself, in that context, in that way.
And that's kind of the point, isn't it? It's not until she was in the UK, she was so defined in that way because it was thrown back in her face so repeatedly. And the problem that with the engagement coinciding with Brexit is there was so much anti-immigration feeling, so much othering of people who weren't white and British, and that just all fed into that. And like you so rightly said, there was so much, disbelief, possibly anger, that someone who was not white, who wasn't blue-blooded, would dare try and marry into the royal family. It all kind of tied in with that anti-immigration sentiment.
Strikes me as the ultimate extension of that generic charge. I blame Brexit.
I want to just talk about one final point before we're running out of time, and that is Diana. And Harry makes comparisons between Meghan and Diana. He says so much of what Meghan is, what she is, how she is, who she is so similar to my mum. But interestingly, he talks about the Martin Bashir interview, and he says we now know it's discredited and his mother was deceived into giving the interview. But he adds, she spoke the truth of her experience. Which, when we talk about them wanting to speak their truth and get their side across, is significant. But they use a clip from the Panorama interview. Now, that is something that William said at the time of the report, which has discredited that interview, that he never wanted to see it used for material gain again. I wonder how that will sit, that his own brother is now rehashing.
That will without doubt jar, because, and there's a slight contradiction there, isn't there, where Harry said it was, we know it was ill-gotten, acquired, and then at the same time, but this was my mother telling her truth, but it was a truth that had been manipulated. And
is it the truth?
I thought that was disappointing, I'm going to be honest. But overall, I took away that Harry seemed to be remarkably relaxed and comfortable in his own skin, and I thought that was in this whole documentary. We most had a lot of coaching, maybe, but he. And I know that's you. I can feel you sort of stiffening beside me, Kevin. But maybe this was a boy who was born into being a prince. He doesn't know anything else but being a prince, so he's still using his princeliness with his. But actually, he's happier outside the cage.
It does seem that way.
Course,
definitely,
I would accept that.
Definitely.
Definitely,
and especially when he was talking about his time in Africa.
With the military as well,
and his 10 years in the military, definitely. It seemed like those two elements absolutely shaped who he was, and I would agree he definitely seemed very comfortable talking about his mother. There was a shot where you saw the back of Diana and him with as a boy, and then you saw Meghan with Archie as a boy that were almost faded into each other. And he talked then. He was talking about
optics,
very clever, because he was also talking about that he sees a lot of Meghan in his mother at that
and he
time,
sees a lot of
himself.
his mother in himself.
Yeah, I am my mother's son.
I'm my mother's son. I make decisions with my heart.
I don't really think I need to ask this question, Kevin. Will you be watching the second instalment?
No, I will try to watch all of it for journalistic reasons, and it's got to get better than the first episode. It really does have
Tessa?
to. And by the way, one last point about the Diana interview. BBC have said they won't show any of it again, but I do think it's quite important that journalists and television channels, and Netflix for that matter, should be allowed to use small clips from it just to illustrate this important moment in royal history. Yes, that interview was nefariously obtained, but it's an important interview and we cannot cancel it.
I would say the overall takeaway, because most people aren't like us scrutinising every word and thinking, is that wrong, is that right? The overall was, that's a couple in love, that's a couple pushing back, and that's a couple earning money. But overall, it was soft, it was intimate, it was everything actually the royal family can't afford to be in many respects. And I felt almost they had an unfair advantage.
Right, they just look like two people telling their love story up until this point. Obviously, that may change. It feels like we're taking a bit of a handbrake turn for the next
I think the next three episodes may be a bit grittier and tougher
Let's hope
as
so.
we see things beginning to unravel. Yeah.
Who needs Love Actually this
Fingers
week?
crossed.
Just watch Harry and Meghan.
That is all we've got time for this week. My thanks to Afua, Kevin and Tessa. We will be back next week with all the latest on the royal family. We hope you can join us and we'll see you then.